Autism Ontario webinar. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. For so long, I've been coming to you from the confines of my home, like so many of us have during COVID over webcam. So it's nice to be back here in a studio, and even nicer to be joined by Marie Hooper as we discuss her spectrum, navigating the unique experiences and needs of autistic girls and women. Marie, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Okay. Before we get to it,
Yeah,
I got a bunch of stuff I need to handle.
Go for it.
So I will be right back. It's important to note, as we always do, that opinions in this webinar are not those of Autism Ontario. They are those of the hosts, myself, don't necessarily reflect the official view of Autism Ontario. Please note that Autism Ontario does not endorse any specific therapy, product, treatment strategy, opinion, service, or individual. We do, however, endorse your right to do your research and learn about what's available out there. And that's why we put on these webinars as well. With the aim of being inclusive and respectful to and representative of the many voices within our diverse community, we'll be using different language, both identity first and person first referential language. We acknowledge that the use of language is evolving rapidly and will continue to be an ongoing discussion within the autism community. You can learn more about our official language statement in the resource section. And that leads me to the technology. You're watching this webinar from home, and around us are a bunch of different things. There's slides that we'll be going through that help inform the conversation. There are a resource section that is packed with links to stuff like the slides for download, as well as other items that I will be referencing. And we also have a Q&A. Now this is my big job, the intro, but then my other big job is getting you answers to your questions. Many of you have already started submitting them. Keep submitting your questions. We will be pausing from time to time to look to get you answers. We have hundreds registered, hundreds online already, so we may not get to all the questions, but as always, we'll do everything we can to get you answers. We have a survey. It's on the left-hand side. It'll pop up when the webinar ends. Please complete that survey. It helps us do a better job. And if you have any issues, there's a help icon, or you can drop it in the Q&A, and someone will get back to you and assist you. All right. Got through that as fast as I could.
Just nice job.
Thank you very much. It's been a while since I did in the studio, so I was a little, it's so much more, safe at home, right?
Yeah.
So Marie, I know you. We've spoken a bit leading up to this webinar. We think we know each other from a past life. We're not sure. But for our audience, can you talk a little bit about your journey to being with us today on the Autism Ontario desk?
So I don't actually know how I got here, if I'm being completely honest. We've done some work for Autism Ontario in the past, but I'm really, really excited. Thank you for having me so much. I am one dissertation defense away from completing my PhD in clinical child psychology at York University. But on that note, I just want to say that I'm not an autonomous practitioner. I work under the supervision of the most brilliant clinical supervisors that you could imagine. And so I feel very lucky for that. But all of my work is supervised. Okay. So if you like what I have to say, it was me. And if you don't, it was them. So just on that note, just to be very clear about that. I've had some the most amazing opportunities. I feel so lucky. I've worked at Bloorview. I've worked at Sick Kids. I've worked at various school boards, and I just feel like I've had such rich training in my schooling and also just in the work that I've done. In addition to my professional career, I'm a mom. Yeah. I am a mom to 2 kids, 10-year-olds, Sloan, who told me this morning that even if I flopped, she would still love me when I got home. So that was real good. That's a nice bar. Yeah. And then my son, Ashton, he's 8. And so what really sort of sparked my interest in opening the clinic that, I'm going to refer to is he's 8 years old and he has an intellectual disability and a catastrophic type of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And so being a parent of a child with needs, I very quickly learned that there's not a lot of places that have a hub where you can get your speech and your occupational therapy and your support for parents and academic remediation. And I was just about to go on my residency literally 2 weeks before, and I saw this place for rent and I was like, it's a really good time to open a clinic, parenting two young kids in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that would have been great for you.
It was very good timing.
Yeah. Although all the parents out there know how hard it is to find places to go for help. And so they're grateful, even though if that was hard on you.
That's really kind. Thank you for saying that. No, I feel like we have had just the best community experience, and it's just really a neuro-affirming clinic, and I feel very grateful to have this place that 1,500 families have come to in the last 2.5 years. So I feel very grateful for that. Also, we have been told that we've got the best hot chocolate bar around, so there's that as well.
There is.
In my practice, I primarily see girls and women. I run a neuro-affirming group called Club Awesome for teen girls who they don't want to learn social skills, they want to be social. And a lot of my experiences, I'm going to talk about that today, what I've drawn from that group. And I want to be very, very clear. I take this job very seriously. I take the work that I do with these families very seriously. I feel very grateful and privileged that I get to get into the lives I get to see homes, when you're doing virtual calls, I get to meet families in their most vulnerable state, and I don't take this for granted for one moment. And so I have de-identified the names of kids that I'm going to talk about in this webinar, but they are real life. They're all stories and clients that I have come across in the years that I've been doing this.
We love the stories. They're always very, very helpful. This was a highly requested topic. Mm-hmm. Our audience said they wanted us to do this, and that's why you're here, reached out to you. Why do you think it's an important topic to be discussing today?
I feel like, as we're going to talk about in a bit, we're so, this area is so misunderstood. Right. We're more and more, we're seeing girls who are coming up age 9, 10, and 11 that are now, being queried for autism when the earlier signs were sort of missed. Right. And so I really want to speak about that a lot today, because I want to point some attention to what that looks like and what this means for early intervention.
Okay, well, that takes us to what we're going to be discussing today: misdiagnosis, the autistic female profile, anxiety, and, because you asked for it, pathological demand avoidance right after that. So you have this slide here, and I think I would have recognized her if you didn't have the name, but this is Sia. Mm-hmm. And her face is usually covered physically, right? Mm-hmm. What's the story behind this slide?
So she was diagnosed last year. And Sia has taken some flack in the community over the years for videos and things like that. But she was diagnosed with autism last year. And she talks about how she's got to go put her human suit on. She talks about how she has never been authentically herself. And rather than simply existing as a human, she feels that she's got to put on that outfit when she leaves the front door. This resonates.
Which is a physical mask.
That's right. Well, her wig, right? Her wigs. She talks about how, one, she didn't want people to know that she was someone famous, just going about her way, but it's her masking, which we'll talk a lot about today. This resonates with so many women, teens, older teens, and women especially. They come to us with some pretty profound questions like, why does the world seem so hard for me? Why do I feel like I'm different from everybody else? And one that's been coming up recently is, why do I feel so alone?
Wow.
And so a diagnosis often will help with feeling heard.
Okay. And the problem, though, is as we get into this next section here, which is misdiagnosis, the data suggests that a lot more boys are diagnosed with autism than women. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think we're just starting that, there's been a lot of different stats that have kind of been thrown around, but I think that's the one that I think is the most closest to where we are maybe right now. Girls are significantly underdiagnosed to boys, but also misdiagnosed.
Right. I think our audience knows this, but it's about the diagnoses that we're talking about, not about how many girls and women are out there on the spectrum. So what are some of the causes of the diagnoses? I see a bunch of things on the slide here.
Yeah. So we, especially our teen girls, they're coming to us with many of these diagnoses.
Is that how they often get to you?
Well, I think it depends on the referral reason.
Right.
Our little ones obviously don't have a backpack of diagnoses the way our teens and women do.
Right.
But it's certainly, it's very rare that I'll have a teen come to me that doesn't have a backpack of diagnoses that they've already been diagnosed with, and really they've been misunderstood.
Okay. So we'll get into a lot of these. Really?
Mm-hmm.
39%.
Yeah. And we've seen as high as 70%. And it's a staggering stat. And I think that the fact remains that regardless if there's a diagnosis, that these children, teens, adults, they're not getting support. And I think it's really important just to on that, like with regards to everything we're going to talk about with this population today is a generalization. It's sort of what I've seen in my practice. It's my personal sort of anecdotal piece, but we want to recognize that no two autistic people are the same, and and it's just another reason why this diagnosis can be so elusive.
Okay, but I've been doing this for a while. Anyone who's been watching, it's been well over a decade. And I know that we've been talking about this problem for some time. So I'm a little surprised that it's still so high.
Yeah.
So why are girls being missed?
So girls and women need to be struggling. They are struggling more than male peers in the sense of we're about 2 to 3 years behind. Okay. On average, it takes 2 to 3 years longer to get a diagnosis than it does for males. That's a pretty recent stat. Autistic girls are often undiagnosed for several reasons. Well, one, there's the gender bias in diagnostic criteria. So traditional reporting are white males, boys. Girls they exhibit different social and communication patterns, which can be missed. We know a lot now about camouflaging and social masking, which I'll pay a little more attention to. Social mimicry, they often imitate their peers' social behaviors to fit in, making their difficulties less noticeable. What else do we have here? Special interests and play patterns. They may align with stereotypical girl interests. And I'm using my air quotes because I definitely want to address that a little bit more.
That has to be changing.
It is, and slowly.
Right.
I would say that this is all slowly.
Okay.
What else do we have here? So we got societal gender norms. So these can lead to attributing social difficulties in girls, like shyness, social anxiety. Oh, she's just shy. Oh, she just can't, when really it's authentically autism.
Right.
And so we want to understand that better. Co-occurring conditions for autistic population in general. We know that many autistic individuals do have a co-occurring diagnosis, mental health diagnosis. They're much more at risk for various reasons. But it can overshadow the features of autism, which is another reason I think, so many girls especially are getting missed. Diagnostic bias, leading to an underestimation in prevalence of girls. We really around OCD and things like that repetitive behavior can often cross over. And so it can misinterpret autism-related diagnoses or traits and things like that during assessment. And then our last one is lack of awareness. So it's really just around, understanding the unique presentation of autism. And, I often will get parents who come in and say, well, the pediatrician ruled it out because they made eye contact. They make good eye contact, or they have friends. And I'll talk a little bit more about that.
So what role does so you sounded like eye contact, right? So they're looking for indicators, not seeing them. Clearly, an intelligent, many people on the spectrum are very intelligent, masking, they can learn to have eye contact. What role does the diagnostic criteria play into the challenge of diagnoses?
Yeah, so I think it's still really clear that we still are working on the DSM-5 text revision right now. And even though girls are getting missed, we are still diagnosing based on the DSM. So it just looks a little bit different. And so if you're here and you have a diagnosis or your child has a diagnosis, it's important to remember that these criterion were developed primarily for with boys in mind because of the prevalence at the time. But the nuanced presentation in girls, it just looks a little bit different. And so I am going to talk a little bit more about these in detail. But the first one, you have to have, all three areas: reciprocity, nonverbal communication, and relationships. So you need to meet in all those areas for part one of the diagnosis.
Right.
And part two, the restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior or interests, you have to have 2 out of 4 of those.
Okay.
In addition to, it has to be impairing. It has to, be impactful in a child's or an adult's, life. It's got to have, there needs to be some sort of social, occupational, or, in general, it has to have been historically problematic,
right.
in a way, although I use air quotes in problematic, but that's how you really kind of, our old school way of diagnosing, that's how we come to this diagnosis.
Seems self-evident in reading that and having it explained to me by the way, the first time. But what are some of the common mistakes?
So big one is relying too much on one measure. Some of the big names in the field of assessing women, Dr. Donna Henderson, I absolutely adore her work. And she talks a lot about how so many clinicians, when she looks at reports, rely so much on one measure. The ADOS-2 and the ADIR are historically our golden sort of gold standard in autism diagnosis. But we know now that it doesn't pick up some of the more sensory presentations, and some of those sort of features of autism. And so I come from a grad program where I have, the best researchers in autism in Canada. And we learn the ADOS and we learn the ADIR and we learn them to a very rigorous standard. But I only use them now as one part of my assessment. I don't rely on one measure anymore.
Okay.
Not that I ever did in the first place, but it's, questionnaires. We want to have questionnaires. There's a rule in my clinic that anyone under the age of 7 gets a classroom observation, because what we learn in classroom naturalistic settings are so important. I do a very thorough diagnostic interview with parents. We get teacher data, we get historical data, and my job is as a detective to sort of put all these pieces together. And that's when we start seeing some of these patterns that are being missed. Forgetting subjective experience is huge. And this is, I think, one of the benefits of being an assessor, but also a therapist. Right. I get to learn so much about the individuals that I'm working with. Questions around eye contact. Yeah, great. Maybe your eye contact's not great. Or maybe you do make eye contact, overuse of eye contact. Yes. But I have so many teens and women who tell me that they're able to do it, but it's actually painful. Painful. Or that they'll look, have come to, social masking and camouflaging. They now look at somebody's forehead, right. So because they know that's what it's expected of them.
Yep.
And so I always ask, what does this mean for you? How does this feel to you? So very, very important to me to get subjective experience. The not conducting an in-depth interview. Again, this is, something I used to spend an hour doing. Now I'm doing a minimum of 2 hours of, walking me through. What was your child like at 2? Oh, they had lots of friends. Okay. Well, did they engage? What did those relationships look? Well, she was very bossy and, she was a leader and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, what was the quality of those relationships? One misconception of girls on the spectrum is that they, don't have friends. They're very socially motivated. Most of the clients I work with, it's how do they maintain those friendships? Not requesting historical information. I spoke on that again already. And then again, the making a
you say report cards. You mean actual report cards from school?
Yeah. So getting report cards, getting copies of old speech reports. So asking for old data. Yeah. And it's really, really funny. One of the most fascinating women I've ever met, she gifted herself for her 50th birthday an autism assessment. And when I asked her, do you think you'd have some of this stuff? She showed up with every single report card, handwritten from teachers. Wow. From all the time.
Wow.
And as a data nerd, I won the lottery.
Yeah, for sure.
And the signs were all there. Yeah. She should be encouraged to, and so there was a lot of really good information that had been written over the years, but she was perfectionistic, very, very intelligent, gifted, but she did have these historical social difficulties.
Right. That's incredible.
Yeah. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does it look? Talk to us about how it looks in girls, or how it looks different in girls.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this stuff in detail, but sort of high level, socially adept, but unaware of like hierarchy, easily makes friends, but really struggles to keep those friendships.
Socially adept, but let's go back to that. Socially adept, but unable to understand hierarchy. What does that mean?
So, understanding. So often when kids have, with the autism profile, we often see that children have difficulty with same age peers.
Okay.
And so they either like to be with older kids or younger kids. And so often have difficulty understanding, like some of the rules of play, but are very social.
Right.
School composure. So teachers, we have so many teachers who will say, I don't see that. I don't see any of that, but they come home and they're having meltdowns.
Yes.
Collecting things without actually playing with the things that they're collecting. My Little Pony is a huge one. Rocks, mythological creatures. And so we have a lot of collecting and not so much engaging in play.
Okay.
Those are some of them. But we'll talk a little bit sort of more in detail about the social and communication differences.
Well, it's a big deal, the masking in the school and that. I just did a webinar on this topic almost specifically where, you talk to the teachers and they say they're great. The parents like, yeah, but every night is a meltdown. It's so hard to get through the day that it's almost physiological what it is they're going through.
Yeah, and so it's like a chameleon almost, right? Like they can fit in with different groups. So I have a lot of clients who will say things like, "I've got a lot of friends," but the parents' sort of story on that is they don't really have a best friend. They have a lot of groups of friends where they go friend to friend, but they're on the periphery, right? They're not so engaged with those friendships,
and they're able to. They figured out how to do that, blending into the different groups and almost as a chameleon, showing enough to each of them that their interests seem to be aligned.
That's correct. Yeah. And so copying, mimicking others. I've got one kiddo who in her room covered, she's a Swiftie through and through. I mean, my kid is, I am, get that.
Yeah.
But what is the intensity of that interest and what she does? And I'll talk a little bit more about behavioral differences, but she has learned speeches that Taylor has given. She has learned how she speaks to people. Even when her mom says at the end of the day, okay, it's Taylor time. So she'll allow her to talk to her about Taylor, in many ways. She'll go back to then studying more videos of Taylor. So she really wants to, mimic her. Using scripted lines from TV series and movies. I have one, who will say, I feel like Elsa when she finally embraces her powers, or I feel like I'm Bridget Jones today. And they don't necessarily, there's either like self-deprecating humor or, describe feeling empowered. So they've learned these from television shows and movies. At times with this, sort of piece, there's also, indifference or indecisiveness. Recently in my girls group, I asked, it's our last night. I want to order dinner for us. Uber Eats. Thought, I should have known better.
Yeah.
Half an hour it took us to decide what we were going to order and what everyone was going to get. And it was, you decide. I don't need to decide. You decide. And so there's this like difficulty with being able to make decisions. They call it decision paralysis. Repeating words or phrases, very sensitive to criticism. As someone who has ADHD, I self-disclose to my clients all the time. We're very, very sensitive to rejection. And so that's really, really something I work on with a lot of my clients in this population. And I think, again, this is around when we're doing diagnostic work, I think just really around asking them what all of this feels like for them. Is it stressful? To what extent do they go to do this covering?
Before we move on to masking, which is a huge topic that I think we've already talked about, got a question here from our audience. Mm-hmm. So as a parent, I understand the need to be neurodiverse affirming.
Mhm.
But how do we balance that with enabling our child to thrive in a neurotypical world that isn't aware or tolerant completely of diversity? I worry that we might inadvertently ostracize them even more when we encourage them to stop masking.
So yes, I will absolutely get to that. I will. Yep. I get this question all the time.
Right.
And my work as a neuroaffirming therapist is helping clients unmask if that's the goal that they want for themselves.
Right.
Some clients do want to fit in more, and we work towards that if that's what they want to do in a non-autistic sort of world, fitting in. But, I'm seeing more and more, and I'm thinking that there's a paradigm shift in the field that it's okay to be authentically you. And I want to encourage that in my clients.
Well, it's becoming easier to be your authentic self in the world, right? It is a trend. I mean, not everywhere, but it definitely is a trend. So, I think we talked a little bit about this one already. Is there more to cover on this slide on the masking?
Well, I think there was just around I was just going to go back to that prior slide, the sensory differences, things like not, disliking tags. Those are historically very sensory things about with autistic kids in general. But in my recent girl group that I keep talking about, an electrician had come to change the lightings in the clinic, and they all had been about, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And all of them noticed the same night that the lights had been changed. And they said, we're really appreciating these warm lights, but it would be much better if you had twinkle lights. And it was a bright light room, but they noticed. My staff didn't even notice, and they had been there an entire week and nobody noticed. They'll turn down music in my waiting room. So highly, highly sensitive, but in much more nuanced ways, more subtle ways.
Okay.
Special interests, and this is a big one because I think this is really where we see a lot of miss. Special interests here are often My Little Pony. I can't tell you how many K-pop fans I have. Korean pop. I've got a client who learned Korean.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's not the interest that they have. Historically, trains, lining up toys, what you think about when you think of autism, but it's the intensity at which they're interested in these topics. Barbie, one client describes, my daughter loves Barbie, will play Barbie all the time. But she doesn't play Barbie where they're engaging. She lines up all the furniture, she dresses them and takes their clothes off and does it again. Clean rooms, like cleaning, is a big one. The biggest one I think that I come across a lot is animals and reading. And so the special interest will even come to rereading the same book because they know what the outcome is going to be, or rewatching the same movie over and over again. So they know what to anticipate. And so I do think that's part of why these girls are being missed, because they're acceptable, socially acceptable, right? If you say, my daughter reads 4 chapter books in a day, great. She's a great reader. Oh yeah. Right? She's going to do so well, right? Yeah. But it's how intense is it? I've got a lovely parent who describes her daughter reads as she gets her ready for school because she can't get her away from the book, and she'll dress her and get her ready while her daughter's reading. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's the intensity of which.
Yeah, I can see as a parent saying, well, at least it's not a screen.
Exactly.
And feeling like that's a good thing. And clean room. I mean, you're a parent. How great would that be?
And I think behavioral differences, one thing we see a lot is, supply teachers in the classroom can really have, difficulties, right? Yeah. Supply teachers can throw off a whole day. Friends who made plans who have to change at last minute, or the parent moved furniture around the living room, can really send someone into distress and being upset. Special ways of doing things all the time, like bedtime rituals, having to do it a certain way, where a family will describe, well, we can't go away because her bedtime ritual is 2 hours, where she has to do, her face cleaning. And so it's just the intensity of which these things come at, where historically those traits haven't been recognized.
As a layman, I am not I do not practice healthcare. I am a webinar moderator. These seem very aligned with the male. So you talk about Barbie, playing Barbie. Same could be said about a child who plays with his Hot Wheels, but really is not ramming them together and putting them around. He's lining them up and sorting them by color and age and type. It seems like these would be easy for not to knock anyone who is struggling with this, but would be easier for professionals to see. Like they seem so similar to me. There's got to be something in the masking or something in the maybe the parental opinion of these things. Like help me.
Yeah, we're starting to see a really nice variety of screeners now that are coming up. The GSC, which is a Baron-Cohen measure, an Atwood measure. The CAT-Q, which is a sort of social masking questionnaire. So we're starting to add a lot more to our diagnostics in terms of screening for these things. My absolute favorite now is the MIGDAS, which is a much more sensitive measure. I mean, it has a screener, but also an interview and also like an objective testing. And so I think the more people that we can get that into the hands of, the more understanding there will be about some of these earlier things that have just kind of gone under the radar. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about masking. Mm-hmm. And this is big difference in the way that girls mask and the like. Let's get into that.
Yeah. So one activity I really like to do with the clients I work with is called the two-faced mask.
Okay.
And I ask clients to draw on the front of the mask to depict, what others believe that they want to see with them, or using drawings of how they believe others see them. And on the back of the mask, I ask them to depict how they see themselves, especially highlighting the differences on the front.
Okay.
And so, I really like to get clients getting creative about this, and often they don't even realize how much they've been doing it. And my job and what I feel as a neuroaffirming therapist, if it's something that the client wants to do and wants to sort of go down this road, we know that it causes a lot of cognitive and emotional effort, and this leads to internal strain and exhaustion. And we hear a lot about autistic meltdowns, and so that's sort of a big one. And often one of the leading factors in that is because of how long and how hard these clients, these girls and and women have been doing this. In general, I think women mask, we're here, I'm acting a certain way. Like I said, I have ADHD, so I'm being very conscious of not moving too much, although I'm French Canadian, so my hands go everywhere anyway. But, I'm conscious of that. I'm going to go home and probably not feel that tired. But when I know that I have to look at you and I have to act in a certain way and I have to practice volleying my conversation back and forth, I have to show interest in know what to say next. I'm thinking about what I need to say next to keep this conversation going. My gesturing, my nonverbal communication. Sometimes clients will say that I'll go to the outing because for women especially, I'm socially motivated. I want to do the things with my friends, but I'm going to be in bed for 3 days after following that because of how much energy and effort it took to get there.
Okay, so you just said something there. You think all women mask. I've known many women and men, for that matter, they're not the outgoing type, right? And so sometimes doing something like a company Christmas party with a whole bunch of new people, they'll say afterwards they feel exhausted, but they're not in bed for 3 days. This is different, right?
Yeah, this is like autistic burnout.
Right.
And we see this so often, especially in our women. That's why they do come to us for assessment, because they're off of work. They're taking a leave. The return to work following the pandemic took a toll on, I always hear autistic people say, I loved the pandemic because I got to be at home and I was comfortable and I was working. Not everyone, but some. That return to work where there's lights and there's sensory and smells, and it's just can be just so overwhelming.
So we're having this conversation and we're talking about you being here today, and and I've talked about people, but most of those listening, they're children that we're talking about, right? And they're dealing with a lot with young people. So with young people, you use a term called meltdown, which looks a lot like another term called tantrum. How do, care providers, parents, anyone, how do you see the difference between those two?
Yeah. So a tantrum, I hate these words, by the way, like tantrum. Often are like more intentional. You think about like toddlers who have a tantrum.
Yeah.
They want something, so they're going to act in a certain way to get what they want. With a meltdown, I like to describe it as my client. I'm not the expert, they are.
Yeah.
But as they've described it to me, it's almost like a hijack of their nervous system.
Okay.
And it's like uncontrollable and overwhelming, and they can't control it.
Yeah.
It can be triggered by a sensory overload, cognitive, all this effort, this camouflaging, all of these things. They can be as intense as a tantrum, but when you think about how this sort of comes to be, it's like a fight or flight sort of response to stress or overload.
So back to a question that we talked about but did not complete. We're masking all day.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, we have autistic burnout, or we have burnout, and it leads to meltdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, we want to reduce the meltdowns, if not for any reason, but how you just described it. You don't want your children going through a meltdown. But, how do we overcome masking? And I want you to remember the question about, the parent asking about how they want them to be able to operate in this, neurotypical world.
Yeah. So again, non-autistic, it's a non-autistic world. It truly is. So I truly, if that's a client's goal, the unmasking for me, and this happens with young kids too. So it's not just our teens and our adults. Mm-hmm. I really like to build trust with my client. And so I want them to feel safe in order to unmask, take off the layers. And so I really involve parents in this. Parents are such beautiful advocates for their kids, but validating their experience, of what they've kind of been dealing with, of having to do this masking, respecting their boundaries of I don't feel safe in my school environment to not mask. So we work on strategies on how to manage that stress while they're in that moment. Right. But often autistic folks will tell me that they feel comfortable to unmask at home or with the people that they feel closest to. And so I want to help them in those situations be their most authentic self. So the load isn't so much when they are in places where they don't feel safe to be them.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about gender diversity for a moment. Mm-hmm. What do you see in your practice specifically as it relates to this?
Yeah, so we see this a lot with younger kids. I would say around age 7 to 12, who have either received a diagnosis of autism, who are sitting somewhere on the gender spectrum. Right. So we don't have true data to understand why this, why we're seeing the prevalence is so high of autistic individuals with gender nonconforming or gender dysphoria or gender sitting on the gender spectrum. But what clients have described it to me is, I just don't know where I fit in. Mm-hmm. And I want to figure out where I fit in. So it's not just about gender. It's about sexual orientation. It's about, all of the different things that as emerging adolescents and our adolescents are really trying to understand where they fit in this world. Yeah. And so it's a lot of questioning. And so a lot of my practice is trauma-informed work, but in a very open space to be able to have these discussions.
Okay. So we got a lot of questions coming in. A quick time check. We're got about 20 minutes left. All right. So we're gonna.
Sorry.
No, I think I don't know about you guys, but tell me in the Q&A. But I'm getting a lot of positive comments. I think the conversation's going great. People have asked about this being how do you get access to this recording? I'll tell you all about that, but it's the same link that'll be available after the event. Anxiety is one of the the culprits of misdiagnosis, or one of the things that are misdiagnosed. What should parents be on the lookout for when it comes to anxiety within this population in particular?
Yeah. So by virtue of being autistic, by nature of being autistic, ADHD, learning disabilities, by nature of having this neurodivergent profile, much more at risk for having an anxiety or depression or mood disorder. disorder, a diagnosis. And it's very rare that we see an autistic child that doesn't have a co-occurring diagnosis. So what they might be on the lookout of school refusal, not wanting to go to school, physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, fears that are coming up out of nowhere, avoidance of not wanting to go places, sleep issues, having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or not wanting to get up in the morning, and really around a big one is heightened sensitivity to like sounds and smells and all of those things, loud noises and bright lights, and the reaction can often be quite strong. Right. And so there's a lot more to talk about in that area, but those are some of the ones that I see often.
Okay, and you're seeing a lot of anxiety. Yeah. That's something that is known. So let's start talking about strategies. Mm-hmm. What are some of the strategies for managing anxiety?
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones is the sensory regulation. Many clients will tell me that they don't feel like they can regulate, and that anxiety can come on kind of out of nowhere. Right. So I want to teach them strategies on things or what to do in that moment. Like we use a term in this field called distress tolerance, being able to manage in that moment, try to, stop that dead in its tracks. It's not always possible, or we'll teach kids to have grounding techniques where they're able to be mindful in the moment. We'll teach them, we'll try to, involve teachers, educators, other family members. We want to keep the routines predictable and as, same as possible. Visual supports are really important for kids with anxiety, with co-occurring autism, making sure that they know what's going to come next. And so those are the sort of evidence-based ways that we understand to sort of mitigate some of the traits of anxiety.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Just so you know, a whole bunch of people said we're doing amazing when I said that. So my inbox.
First webinar.
So you are doing great.
Thank you. You know what? Actually, Matt, I want to add one more thing there.
Sure.
Self-advocacy. I do a lot of assertiveness training in my therapy sessions with clients, so that they can self-advocate. That is often a difficulty of, not being able to stand up for themselves or say what they need. So we do a lot of practice working with parents to teach their kids at home to self-advocate, but also with me working with them to be able to stand up when they need to. Our girls are at risk because they're so vulnerable, they're naive. Many of them are naive, and that is a big part of my treatment plan when I'm working with girls.
It has to be so important. As father of a 16-year-old, my oldest, and with just the changes that have happened within the world over the past 5 years, I needed to. He wasn't able to communicate with me effectively right out of the gates about, sexuality and gender because he felt I didn't get it, which I am sure as much as parents love their children, there's got to be a bit of that feeling, that they don't understand them because no one does. And, really important. But also it's got to be a little hard knowing some of the other challenges that come along with autism. Mm-hmm. For self-advocacy. Have you had good success in that? Is it a challenge? What are your experiences there?
I don't know if it's because the words got around that if you come out or you're brave in session, we have brave cupcakes at our clinic. So maybe that's why.
Yeah.
But I feel so privileged to be one of the first people that kids do come out to or do have questions and feel comfortable enough to be able to talk to me about something that might be going on for them. And we have honest conversations about involving parents. Yeah. And so that trust, that rapport is truly, the secret sauce to, clients feeling comfortable.
Okay. All right. So next we're going to jump into something that when I first heard PDA, I thought it was something else. I thought that acronym meant something different. And I was like, that's interesting. Pathological demand avoidance. It's got some other names floating around out there. Is something that our audience has been asking for. Very little information out there on it. I do want to direct our audience to the resource section where we have the FAQ PDA from the PDA Society in the UK, where, interesting enough, this is part of the DSM, part of the diagnoses, is not in Canada.
Correct.
And so there isn't a lot as it relates to evidence-based training. There isn't a lot of people working with it. So clearly, there are a lot of questions. We shouldn't assume anything when it comes to our audience. So, talk a little bit about what is PDA and a little bit about what we need to know, about, I know I covered a bit of it, but a little bit about what we need to know about its current status as a diagnosis in Canada.
Well, first of all, I want to say, what could you have a worse name? Pathological.
I know.
Like being referred to as an identity as pathological. I feel like
it sounds like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Bad.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And so there's many advocates in the field that will say persistent drive for autonomy, have renamed it,
right,
or pervasive drive for autonomy. Again, this is an absolutely new field. Started off by Dr. Newson in the 80s, started seeing this sort of subtype, the subgroup of PDAers, as they call themselves in the community. And again, like you said, we don't have a lot of information on this profile, but what we do know is that it's resistance to ordinary demands of everyday life.
Okay.
Teeth brushing, getting to school, combing their hair, right? It's in their nervous systems. It's different in ODD.
I was going to say, that sounds like oppositional defiant disorder or ODD, but there's a difference due to the physiological response?
Well, I think with ODD, it's more of there's a bit more control of defiance, of being able to say no to your parent.
Right.
Whereas, in my opinion, kids do well if they can.
Okay.
Okay. And for kids, PDAers, the response is, I can't do what you're asking me right now.
Yeah.
And so historical sort of evidence on how to change behavior with kids with autism does not work with PDAers. It's actually the opposite. So it's this, strategies to avoid demands. They become really, really good at not, lying, getting out of things, manipulating. It's around the central nervous system and this true difficulty with anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in looking at this profile, how it sounds like it's got to be so hard. I hear about kids not being able to go to school, which I know is one of the reasons that they come and see you. Without it being a diagnosis, officially and the like, what are the things to look for, I guess, if this is a concern?
Yeah, so the big one is the school refusal. Okay. That's often what I will hear as a referral question that's coming to our admin. My kid won't go to school. They went yesterday, but they're not going to go. They're not going today. What's going on? And it's not 1 or 2 days. It's often these kids are off for a longer period of time. That's kind of been the one. We know that's one of the main referral reasons, but it's again this ordinary demands. I asked them to brush their teeth and it ended up in a meltdown. Today that happened, but yesterday it didn't. Right. And so there's also this inconsistency of responding to things, demands being put on them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you switch to the next, page here. I mean, this is really the best we have right now.
I was gonna say, seems simple enough.
Yeah, this is kind of the best we have right now when it comes to, PDA evidence-based data. We don't have a lot.
Yeah.
And so we really want to emphasize collaboration with your child. Very different than what we would recommend for another child who has an autism profile, a classical sort of autism profile. This is pick your battles. Plain and simple, minimize your rules, enable some choices and control, explain your reasoning for why you're asking them to do the thing you're doing, but don't make mountains out of molehills, essentially all the time. Pick your battle. Anxiety management. I truly believe that we really need to treat these kids as if they're on the verge of a panic attack at all times, right? Because one day you might get a behavior that you're hoping for, and the next day even if it's something they want to do. They want to go to school, but they can't. They want to brush their teeth, but they can't. It's like a hijack. It's fear of a fight or flight response. They just can't do it. Recognize that these behaviors are always rooted in anxiety. Negotiation and collaboration. Oh my goodness. Acting as a partner to your kids and solving problems is just so important. And having your kid trust that you're here to help them rather than to be the authoritarian can be really helpful. Disguise and manage demands. I'll talk about that more on the next slide, but really it's around phrasing requests indirectly.
Okay.
Kids are told what to do all day long. Put your shoes on, go get your notebook. It's time for lunch now. Don't do that. Don't touch your friend, and it's constant demands being placed on them. So we'll talk about that language in a moment. And the last piece here, adaptation. Trying humor, distraction, role play. It's a bit of dancing, I think, to kind of get into what your child might respond to. Leave lots of time and always have a plan B. C. Maybe D. It really depends. But these are all really important points. And I think the PDA Society, it's not even just in Canada that PDA is not recognized. It's just like in North America in general. Right. And so the UK is way ahead of us in terms of understanding this profile a little bit better. But if we turn to the next slide, Matt, I think, low demand parenting is kind of what I
thought that was a made up word when I started looking into this. I mean, all words are made up, but I thought that was, something a kid came up with.
Yeah. Low arousal sort of approaches to keep anxieties at a minimum by reducing demands placed on children. We're hoping that we're going to keep them from that fight or flight mode. And the last one there is collaborative problem solving. So having their children, adults and kids being able to engage in problem solving together. And we can do that by declarative language. So using an I statement. I'm noticing that your room is a little messier than it normally is. I'm wondering maybe if we can clean it up together. I'm thinking about maybe the wrappers that are on the floor in your room rather than pick up your toys. I'm noticing toys on the floor. I worry that they might get stepped on and broken. It's very different than, direct language.
Right.
And, so it's really around learning how to rephrase the way you say things. Because again, it's not that they can't. It's not that they won't. It's that they can't.
Right.
And so understanding that it's coming from a place of anxiety is just so, so important.
Okay. So I want you to take this, I know I'm managing school. Actually, let's go through this because I want to bring this back to that initial question that I asked and how some of these strategies might relate to that big problem about going to school. But how is it important to manage at school?
So I've never talked to teachers more than I'd have with than I do with clients that are presenting with a PDA profile.
Right.
It involves a whole team approach. It's educating teachers on how to talk to children differently, how to engage children differently. It may be that today Johnny wants to go to school or went to school, but he was praised so much for coming to school today that tomorrow he can't because he can't live up to the expectation, or he's worried about that, or the room was so overwhelming that he knows it's going to be anxiety provoking for him. So really I do a lot of coaching with schools and teachers and teams around building a supportive environment and allowing the child to do some hybrid, especially when we're first starting to see the school refusal. Giving the child a ton of choices, but not too many choices because we don't want to overwhelm.
So what's that look like? When we talk about a child who physically cannot, they have a meltdown, they have the extreme anxiety, cannot go to school. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the various things that we've just talked about and how you put that into play. Because I got 17 questions about school refusal here. So trying to figure out a way of getting all of those answered as best I can here with the tactics and the not tactics, but the strategies that you talked about. Talk about things to try with school refusal in particular.
Yeah, so we like to eventually get to gradual exposure, but we want to make sure that the child feels safe first. So it's building trust and rapport. Okay. Often it is coming to a place of a very busy classroom with an already overwhelmed teacher because their classes are too big.
Yeah.
And, unmanageable at times. So we really want to get buy-in from the teacher of creating a safe space for this child. We want to give them choice of being able to do some of the meetings that they want to go to school for the St. Patty's Day party, but they can't. So involving the child by Zoom, if possible, giving the child an opportunity to still see their friends. Their friends can still say, you know, we really miss you, Joey, or Matt, you know, we want you to come back, without putting the pressure on them by having them have to come into the school. This takes a lot of work. There's a lot of dancing.
Yeah, but a lot of the school boards have started doing this with the pandemic with folks, right? Like, there's got to be a bit of a framework in place.
Yeah, there's a bit of unschooling when it comes to this profile.
Yeah.
Whereas the typical institution of school should probably look a little bit different.
Yeah.
But we don't have the capacity to do that. So we want to build trust and rapport and treat these children from a sort of a trauma-informed approach and understanding what anxiety is doing to them. And so I often will give a child a book and I can't remember the name of the author now, but I'm not giving him credit. I feel bad now.
We'll get it.
We'll get it.
We'll get it, and we'll get it out to you.
And it's this is what my day looks like. These are all the things that I feel. And I have a child check off what the things that they feel and why it's so difficult for them. And I have them go through their entire school day, and they're able to pick out what are the things that are hard so that I know exactly what to target. Because it's different from child to child. But it's been my saving grace in therapy, because kids really resonated with it. And I send it to them, or I have it with them in person, because sometimes it's not just school refusal. They don't want to come to my office. They don't want to come to the clinic. Yeah. So I have this sort of very fluid rule, like, okay, you don't have to meet me in the office, or, you know, we can do it online. I can do a phone call if video is too much pressure for you. So it's being flexible, clear communication, having an open conversation with their whole team. And so it's probably the most collaborative type of therapy that I do. And with, you know, I don't just treat autistic girls and families. Right. Like, I work with a ton of different populations, but this is I would say the most involved.
Okay. So let's tackle this so we can get to the questions here. But something that is also important here is self-care. So what does this look like for autistic girls?
So self-care in general, the term is very irritating when you hear about it. Yeah, very irritating. But really it's around understanding your responses to all the different things. And so I always want, I want kids to know, I want to empower kids to know about themselves so they know, so I can show them how to take a digital detox. Right. If social media and TikTok, this phenomenon of like, everybody has autism, everyone has ADHD, and they're coming to us like, it's once you get that into the algorithm, all they hear about are these things, and it can be very stressful. So we talk about digital detoxes. Exercise is huge. I should take my own advice. I don't do that as much as I should. Using their special interest as like a hobby, right? Like really engaging their special interest, taking body breaks, movement breaks, deep pressure activities. A lot of these kiddos have online communities of children that they're friends with. And so we're giving a lot of like safety around making sure that the people that we're engaging with online are safe people to be engaging with online. So it's really around being an advocate for yourself, knowing what you need, identifying, because sometimes it's hard. A lot of the work we do in therapy is, therapists who are working with autistic kids is like not understanding what's going on in their body, of how they're feeling. And so doing a lot of work around that so that they can help themselves.
On the special interest or specialized interest, I don't know if you caught it, but our last webinar a couple of weeks ago was on this topic and about using it as a way of learning social skills and different things. It's great. It's about a young man who ends up running a D&D group with Autism Ontario. If you haven't heard of it, it's great. It's available on demand and like. So I was able to knock off a lot of questions with my few questions. But before we look to adjourn, what people are asking right now, and what people are seeing online, and where we are as a country and as a group. What are some thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Wow. We are seeing a paradigm shift. It's slow. It's like molasses, but we are seeing change. I'm consulting with the headmaster at Limpsfield Grange, which is there's tons of documentaries about the school online, but it's a beautiful model. And it's a boarding school, but also a day school for autistic girls who have lots of special interests that we really turn into strengths. And my ultimate goal is to open a school like Limpsfield Grange here in Toronto. That is my next project. And so I want people to know that we're noticing, we're paying attention to this.
Yeah.
We have your girls' best interest at heart. And there are a small section of us that really want to see these girls thrive. No, there's a lot of people that want to see these girls thrive, but we want to do the groundwork to make sure that it's coming. I guess that's what I want to say. It's coming. It's slow, but it's coming.
Well, we just got a bunch of thank yous coming in as we reach the hour. Many folks are asking about your program and how to get in contact with you. So I'm sure you'll hear from them directly. Mm-hmm. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll aspire to try and get you what answers we can on any of those topics. Remember, check out the resource section before you go. There's some great stuff in there, including the information from the PDA Society in the UK, which is at this point the authority. Take the survey, please. Let us know what we can do and the like. And, early on, you talked about awareness. One of the ways to drive awareness for all of this is by sharing this webinar. It will be available on demand on the Autism Ontario website within 24 hours. The full webinar will be viewable. Share that with your friends, family, loved ones, caregivers, teachers, ministers, whomever you think it might be valuable for, because awareness helps. And the more folks that come through this program, the more webinars we can do. And with that, Marie, thanks so much for your time. It was great.
Man. Loved it. Thank you.
And thank you all for all of your kind words, but also all of your questions and comments. We look forward to seeing you on our next Autism Ontario webinar.